My husband saved my life with a 3-word text message, but by the time I understood why, he was gone, and a stranger was holding his phone. My name is Lauren Hayes. I'm 31 years old, and I teach art at a high school in Beaverton, Oregon. I've been married to Daniel Hayes for 6 years. He's 33, works as a fire safety inspector for the city, and he's the kind of person who notices everything. Details other people miss, he catches. It's what makes him good at his job, and it's what saved both our lives. There are other people you'll need to know about in this story. My younger sister Beth is 28 and works as an ER nurse. She's tough, practical, and the person I call when I need help. Our neighbor Frank Morrison is a 67-year-old retired veteran who lives 3 doors down and keeps an eye on the whole street. Daniel's work partner Andre Wilson has been his best friend for 5 years, and Officer Melissa Grant, a police officer I'd never met before the night everything happened, became the person who stood between us and disaster. It was a Thursday evening, and I was at Beth's apartment helping her pack for a move. She was relocating across town to be closer to the hospital, and I'd promised to help her wrap dishes and label boxes. We'd ordered pizza, and I was knee-deep in newspaper and packing tape when my phone buzzed at exactly 9:47 p.m. It was a text from Daniel. "Don't come home tonight. Stay at Beth's. Trust me." I stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood what it said. Don't come home? We'd talked on the phone just 2 hours earlier. Everything had been fine. Daniel was planning to watch a recorded game and maybe do some work in the garage. Now he was telling me not to come home with no explanation? I immediately texted back, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" The message showed delivered, but not read. I called him. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. My stomach dropped. Something was very wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love hearing from all of you. Let me back up and tell you about my life with Daniel, so you understand why that text message was so out of character. Daniel and I met 7 years ago at a community barbecue in the park. I'm naturally shy, the kind of person who finds a quiet corner and observes rather than jumping into conversations. I was sitting on a bench watching the sunset, thinking about color and light the way art teachers do, when this guy sat down next to me and started talking about how the orange in the sky reminded him of a painting he'd seen once. We ended up talking for 2 hours about art, old movies, and our shared love of terrible puns. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in years. Daniel proposed a year later on a hiking trail overlooking the Columbia River Gorge. We got married in a small ceremony with just family and close friends, and we bought a modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet Beaverton neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Daniel grew tomatoes in the backyard every summer, and I turned the spare bedroom into an art studio. Our marriage was built on trust and communication. We talked about everything. Daniel never kept me in the dark about anything, which is why that cryptic text message sent my mind spinning. That Thursday had started like any other day. I'd gone to work, taught my classes, stayed late to help a student with a college portfolio. Daniel had finished his shift inspecting commercial properties around 5 p.m. and headed home. When I called him on my drive to Beth's apartment, he sounded completely normal, relaxed even. He told me to have fun helping Beth pack and that he'd see me later that night. We said, "I love you," and hung up. Everything was fine. I'd arrived at Beth's place around 6:30 with pizza and supplies. Beth's apartment was chaos, boxes everywhere, half her kitchen already packed. We put on music and got to work, talking and laughing while we wrapped her dishes in newspaper. It was a normal evening, comfortable, safe. Then that text came through at 9:47 p.m., and everything changed. I read it out loud to Beth. "Don't come home tonight. Stay at Beth's. Trust me." She looked up from the box she was packing, her face immediately concerned. "That's really weird. Did something happen at your house?" I tried calling Daniel again. Voicemail. I sent another text. "Daniel, you're scaring me. Please tell me what's going on." No response. The message stayed on delivered, never switching to read. Beth grabbed her phone. Maybe there's a gas leak or something? Maybe he's dealing with an emergency and can't talk? But that theory didn't make sense. If there was a gas leak, Daniel would call 911 first and then immediately call me to explain. He wouldn't send a vague text and then disappear. That wasn't how he operated. Daniel was a communicator. He over-explained things, if anything. I decided to call Frank Morrison, our neighbor. Frank was former military, observant, and he spent a lot of time on his front porch watching the neighborhood. If something was happening at our house, he'd know. Frank answered on the third ring. "Lauren, everything all right?" I asked if he'd noticed anything unusual at our place. There was a pause. "Actually, yeah. About half an hour ago, I saw Daniel leave in his truck. He was moving fast, didn't stop to wave or nothing, which isn't like him. Then, maybe 15 minutes ago, someone else showed up at your house. I couldn't see who it was from my porch, but they went inside. There's a car in your driveway I don't recognize. Dark sedan." My blood went cold. Someone else was in my house? "Frank, can you see my house right now?" I heard him walking to his window. "Yeah, I'm looking at it now. Lights are on inside. That dark sedan is still in the driveway." I thanked him and hung up, my hands shaking. Beth was staring at me. "What did he say?" I told her everything. Someone was in our house, and Daniel was gone. Beth's first instinct was to call the police. "This isn't normal, Lauren. Something's really wrong." But I hesitated. What would I even tell them? My husband sent me a weird text and now someone's in my house? It sounded paranoid. Maybe Daniel had a friend over. Maybe there was a perfectly logical explanation I wasn't seeing. But the words "trust me" kept echoing in my head. Daniel was asking me to trust him without understanding why. That meant he knew I'd be confused and worried, but he needed me to listen anyway. For the next 2 hours, I sat on Beth's couch staring at my phone. I called Daniel every 15 minutes. Every single call went to voicemail. I tried texting. Nothing. I called Andre Wilson, Daniel's work partner, thinking maybe Daniel had mentioned something to him. Andre hadn't heard from Daniel since their shift ended. "You want me to drive by your place and check it out?" he offered. I almost said yes, but something stopped me. What if showing up there made things worse? What if Daniel was keeping me away for a reason, and sending someone to the house would ruin whatever he was trying to do? Beth made us tea that neither of us drank. We sat there in her half-packed apartment, surrounded by boxes and newspaper, waiting for something to happen. I kept refreshing the news on my phone, checking local reports for accidents or emergencies in our area. Nothing. At midnight, Beth suggested we try to get some sleep. Maybe Daniel's phone died. Maybe he'll call you first thing in the morning and explain everything. I knew she didn't believe that any more than I did, but I appreciated her trying to comfort me. I couldn't sleep. I lay on Beth's couch with my phone clutched in my hand, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario. Was Daniel hurt? Was he in trouble? Had something happened that he couldn't tell me about? The not knowing was torture. Every minute felt like an hour. At 2:13 a.m., Beth's phone lit up with a notification. She'd fallen asleep in the chair across from me, but the sound woke her up. She grabbed her phone, glanced at the screen, and her entire face went white. "Lauren." Her voice was barely a whisper. She turned the phone toward me, and I saw the breaking news alert. There was a photo of a house completely engulfed in flames. My house. Our house. The place where Daniel and I had built our life together was burning. The headline read, "Explosion and fire in Beaverton neighborhood. Multiple emergency responders on scene." I grabbed the phone from Beth's hand and stared at the image. Flames were shooting out of every window. The roof had partially collapsed. Fire trucks surrounded the property, spraying water that seemed to do nothing against the inferno. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. That was my home. The kitchen where we cooked Sunday dinners. The bedroom where we talked about our future. The studio where I painted. All of it was gone. Beth was saying something, talking about getting in the car and driving there, but I couldn't hear her over the ringing in my ears. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Where was Daniel? He'd told me not to come home. Did that mean he knew this was going to happen? Was he trying to protect me? Or was he inside when it happened? I dialed his number one more time, not expecting an answer, just needing to try. This time, someone picked up, but it wasn't Daniel's voice. It was a woman, professional, calm, unfamiliar. "Is this Lauren Hayes?" My voice came out as a croak. Yes. Who is this? Where's my husband? That's his phone. Where is he? The woman's tone was gentle but serious. Mrs. Hayes, my name is Officer Melissa Grant with Beaverton Police Department. I'm at the scene of the fire at your residence. Your husband is okay, but he asked me to contact you if you called. He wants you to know that he's safe and that you did the right thing by staying away. I couldn't process what Officer Grant was saying. Daniel was okay, but our house was on fire. How was any of this okay? My voice came out shaky and desperate. I don't understand. What happened? Why is my house burning? Where is Daniel right now? Officer Grant took a breath, and I could hear sirens and shouting in the background. Mrs. Hayes, your husband discovered an explosive device in your home earlier this evening. He immediately evacuated the premises and called 911. Our bomb squad responded, but the device detonated before they could complete the disarmament process. That's what caused the explosion and the subsequent fire. Your husband is currently being treated by paramedics for minor injuries, primarily smoke inhalation and some burns, but he's stable and conscious. An explosive device. A bomb. Someone had put a bomb in my house. The words weren't making sense. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not to art teachers in quiet Oregon neighborhoods. Who would do this? Why? Was it an accident? Officer Grant's pause told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. Mrs. Hayes, this was not an accident. This was a deliberate and targeted attack. We're investigating the situation now, but your husband may have critical information that will help us identify who's responsible. Right now, I need to know your exact location so we can send officers to ensure your safety. Beth had been listening on speaker, and she grabbed the phone from my trembling hands. This is Beth Sullivan, Lauren's sister. We're at my apartment in Northwest Portland. She rattled off the address. What do you mean ensure her safety? Are you saying Lauren is still in danger? Officer Grant's voice remained calm and professional. If someone planted an explosive device specifically targeting your sister's residence, we have to operate under the assumption that they may attempt further contact or harm. I'm dispatching a unit to your location immediately. Do not leave. The apartment. Do not open the door for anyone except uniformed officers who will properly identify themselves with badges and names. Do you understand? After Officer Grant hung up with instructions to stay put and stay safe, I sat there in complete shock. Beth was moving around the apartment, checking the locks on the door and windows, closing the curtains, doing all the practical things while my brain struggled to catch up with reality. Someone had tried to kill us. Not rob us, not scare us, but actually kill us with a bomb. And if Daniel hadn't found it, if he hadn't texted me to stay away, we'd both be dead right now. Then something clicked in my memory. About 3 weeks ago, Daniel had mentioned something at dinner. He'd been getting strange phone calls at work, someone asking detailed questions about our home address, what our schedules were like, whether we had a security system. At the time, Daniel thought it might be related to a property owner he'd recently cited for serious fire code violations. The owner had been angry, had made some vague threats, but Daniel's supervisor had filed a report and they'd moved on. Daniel had mentioned it to me once, seemed slightly concerned, but not alarmed, and then never brought it up again. I'd completely forgotten about it until this moment. 2 police officers arrived at Beth's apartment exactly 11 minutes later. They knocked and announced themselves clearly, showed their badges through the peephole, and only then did Beth unlock the door. One was an older officer named Patterson, and the other was a younger officer named Rodriguez. They did a sweep of Beth's apartment, checked all the rooms and the fire escape, then positioned themselves outside the door. Officer Rodriguez came back in to talk to us. Mrs. Hayes, your husband is being transported to Emmanuel Hospital right now. He's going to be fine, but they want to monitor him for a few hours because of the smoke inhalation. Detective Park is with him taking a statement. We'll take you to the hospital as soon as we get clearance that it's safe. I wanted to scream at them that I needed to see Daniel right now, that I didn't care about clearances or safety protocols, but I knew they were trying to protect me. Officer Rodriguez sat down across from me, pulling out a notepad. I know this is overwhelming, but I need to ask you some questions while everything is fresh. Has anyone threatened you or your husband recently? Have you noticed anyone following you or watching your house? Any unusual phone calls, emails, or messages? I told him about the phone calls Daniel had mentioned, about the property owner who'd been cited. Rodriguez wrote everything down, then radioed the information to someone. Beth brought me a glass of water that I couldn't drink. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that image from the news. Our house in flames. Everything we owned, every memory, every piece of our life together, just gone. The DD wedding photos from our honeymoon, the quilt my grandmother made us, Daniel's collection of vintage records, my art supplies and half-finished paintings, all of it burned or destroyed. But we were alive. That's what mattered. We were alive because Daniel had found that bomb and gotten out, because he'd warned me to stay away, because I'd trusted him even when I didn't understand why. Officer Patterson's radio crackled, and he stepped into the hallway to take the call. When he came back, his expression was grim. We've identified a suspect. Your husband gave detectives a name, and we're actively searching for him now. His name is Victor Brennan. Does that name mean anything to you? I shook my head. I'd never heard that name in my life. Patterson pulled up a photo on his phone and showed it to me. It was a driver's license photo of a man in his early 40s with thinning hair and cold eyes. 6 weeks ago, your husband condemned a warehouse this man owned in Northwest Portland. The property was being used to manufacture illegal fireworks. Brennan was arrested, lost his business, and has been out on bail awaiting trial. He made threats against your husband during and after the inspection. There's a restraining order, but 2 days ago, he cut off his ankle monitor and disappeared. We've been looking for him. Beth grabbed my hand and squeezed it. This man, this stranger I'd never met, had decided that because Daniel was doing his job, because he'd reported illegal and dangerous activity, we deserved to die. The injustice of it, the randomness, made me feel sick. We hadn't done anything wrong. Daniel had probably saved lives by shutting down that illegal fireworks operation, and this was his reward. A bomb in his house and his wife in hiding. At 4 a.m, Officer Grant herself arrived at Beth's apartment. She was tall, maybe late 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Mrs. Hayes, I'm going to personally escort you to the hospital to see your husband. We have officers positioned there, and it's secure. Your husband has been asking for you. I stood up so fast I got dizzy. Beth grabbed my arm to steady me. I'm coming too, she said, and Officer Grant nodded. That's fine. Stay close and follow my instructions exactly. The drive to the hospital felt surreal. The sun was starting to come up, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. Officer Grant drove carefully, checking her mirrors constantly, and I realized she was watching to make sure we weren't being followed. The idea that someone might be out there right now, watching, waiting for another chance to hurt us, made my skin crawl. We pulled into the hospital parking garage, and Officer Grant parked near the elevator in a spot marked for police vehicles. Stay between Officer Rodriguez and me. Don't stop for anyone. Understood? We nodded and followed her inside. The hospital hallways were eerily quiet at that hour, just the hum of machines and the occasional beep of monitors. Officer Grant led us through a maze of corridors until we reached a room on the 3rd floor with 2 uniformed officers stationed outside. She nodded to them, and they stepped aside to let us through. When I walked into that room and saw Daniel sitting up in bed, his face covered in soot, his arms wrapped in white bandages, an oxygen tube under his nose, I completely broke down. I rushed to his side, careful not to hurt him, and we held each other while I cried into his shoulder. You're alive. You're okay. I thought I lost you. Daniel's voice was rough from the smoke, but his words were clear. I'm here. We're both here. That's all that matters. Beth stood by the door, giving us privacy while wiping tears from her own eyes. Officer Grant spoke quietly with someone in the hallway, then stepped back inside. I'll give you a few minutes, but then Detective Park needs to speak with both of you. Daniel nodded, and Grant closed the door softly behind her. I pulled back to look at Daniel's face, touching his cheek gently. Tell me what happened. Tell me everything. He took a shaky breath and began. Daniel explained that around 9:15, he'd been in the garage putting away some tools when he noticed the electrical panel door was slightly open. That was strange because he'd just inspected it 2 days earlier while doing some maintenance, and he always closed it completely. When he opened the panel to check, he immediately saw wires that didn't belong there. His training as a fire inspector kicked in instantly. Those weren't standard electrical wires. They were different colors, different gauge, and they were connected to something behind the access panel. His hands were shaking as he carefully removed the panel cover, and that's when he saw it. A device with a digital timer counting down. He had 43 minutes. I didn't touch anything. I didn't try to be a hero. I just backed away slowly, grabbed my phone and keys, and got out of the house as fast as I could. He'd called 911 from his truck while driving away from the neighborhood, giving them our address and explaining what he'd found. The dispatcher had immediately sent the bomb squad and told him to stay far away from the property. Then he'd called me, but he'd made a decision in that moment. If I told you there was a bomb, you'd panic. You'd want to come home, or you'd call me 100 times, and I needed you to just stay away and be safe. So I kept it simple. Don't come home. Trust me. I knew you'd be confused and worried, but I also knew you'd listen. The bomb squad had arrived within 12 minutes, which was incredibly fast. They'd evacuated the surrounding houses, including Frank Morrison, who'd apparently argued with them about leaving his home until they physically escorted him out. The technicians had gone inside to assess the device, while Daniel waited behind the command vehicle, answering questions about the layout of the house and where exactly the bomb was located. They'd worked for over 2 hours trying to disarm it. Daniel could hear them communicating over the radios, discussing wire configurations and trigger mechanisms. Then, at 11:43 p.m., something went wrong. Maybe they cut the wrong wire, or maybe the device had a failsafe they didn't anticipate. Either way, it detonated. Daniel had been standing behind a fire truck when the explosion happened. The blast wave was so powerful it knocked him off his feet and onto the hot asphalt. That's how he'd gotten the burns on his arms and back. Flying debris had cut his face and hands. The sound had been deafening, and for a few seconds, he couldn't hear anything except ringing. When he'd gotten up and looked at our house, it was already engulfed in flames. 3 bomb squad technicians had been injured, but thankfully all of them survived. They'd been wearing protective gear that had saved their lives. Detective Park arrived in the room at exactly 5 a.m. He was in his late 40s with gray hair and tired eyes that had clearly seen too much. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Hayes, we need to talk about Victor Brennan and the warehouse inspection." Daniel nodded, wincing as he adjusted his position in the bed. Detective Park pulled out a file folder and opened it. "6 weeks ago, you condemned a warehouse on Thurman Street. The inspection report says you found evidence of illegal fireworks manufacturing. Walk me through what you found." Daniel explained that he'd been called to inspect the warehouse because neighbors had reported strange smells and occasional small explosions coming from the building. When he'd arrived with Andre, his partner, they'd found a massive operation. Thousands of illegal fireworks being manufactured in conditions that were incredibly dangerous. Open flames near explosive materials, no ventilation, no fire suppression systems, chemicals stored improperly. It was a disaster waiting to happen. If those fireworks had ignited, they would have leveled the entire block. I had no choice but to condemn the property immediately and report it to the police. Victor Brennan had been there during the inspection, and he'd been furious, screaming, threatening, saying Daniel had ruined his life and would pay for it. Detective Park nodded, flipping through pages in his file. Brennan was arrested that same day. We found enough evidence to charge him with manufacturing illegal explosives, reckless endangerment, and about a dozen fire code violations. He posted bail 3 weeks ago and was supposed to be under house arrest with an ankle monitor. But 2 days ago, he cut the monitor off and disappeared. We've had a warrant out for his arrest since then. He looked at Daniel seriously. This bomb was sophisticated. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. The components match materials used in fireworks manufacturing. We're certain it was Brennan. I felt my Stomach turn. So he's still out there? He could try again? Detective Park's expression was grim. That's why we have officers protecting you. But I have a proposal. He looked between Daniel and me. The media is reporting that there was an explosion with casualties, but we haven't released names or specifics. Brennan probably thinks his attack was successful. He thinks you're dead. We want to keep it that way for now. If he believes he got away with it, he might get careless, might make a mistake that helps us find him. But it means you'll need to go into protective custody until we can apprehend him. Beth spoke up from her spot by the door. For how long? Detective Park shook his head. I don't know. Could be days, could be weeks. But I can promise you this. We have every available officer looking for him. We will find him. Daniel reached for my hand. What do you think? I looked at my husband, bandaged and exhausted, and thought about that bomb in our house, about how close we'd come to dying. I think we do whatever it takes to stay alive and make sure he can never hurt anyone else. By 7 that morning, we were being moved to a safe house on the outskirts of Portland. It was a small, plain rental home that could have been anywhere. 2 officers were stationed outside at all times. Beth was allowed to visit, but had to be cleared each time. I called my school principal and explained I had a family emergency and would need a substitute indefinitely. I couldn't tell her the truth, couldn't tell anyone what was really happening. Daniel called his supervisor with the same vague explanation. Our lives had been completely upended, and we had no idea when or if they'd ever return to normal. For 3 days, we lived in that safe house watching the news reports. The media said there had been multiple injuries and at least 1 fatality in the Beaverton explosion, but they didn't give names. I hated lying to the world. My friends, my co-workers, my students all thought I might be dead, but Detective Park insisted it was necessary. On the morning of the 4th day, his strategy worked. Victor Brennan walked into a hardware store in Gresham, trying to buy materials that could be used to make another bomb. The clerk recognized him from the wanted posters that had been plastered all over the city and quietly called 911 while keeping him talking. Officers arrived and arrested him without incident in the parking lot. Detective Park called us with the news, and I felt a wave of relief so strong it made me dizzy. It was over. We were safe. But then Detective Park said something that made my blood run cold. There's something else you need to know. Brennan wasn't working alone. My heart stopped. What do you mean he wasn't working alone? Detective Park's voice was serious on the other end of the phone. Victor Brennan has a younger brother named Dylan Brennan. We didn't know about him initially because he doesn't have a criminal record and wasn't involved in the fireworks operation. But during Victor's interrogation, he mentioned Dylan several times. When we started digging, we discovered Dylan had been helping him plan the attack. He was the one who did surveillance on your house, figured out your routines, and helped Victor get access to plant the device. And here's the part that's going to be hard to hear. While we were arresting Victor in Gresham, Dylan was 2 blocks away from your safe house. The room started spinning. Beth grabbed my arm to steady me while Daniel sat up straighter in his chair despite the pain it caused him. Detective Park continued. Officer Grant was doing a routine patrol around your location when she noticed a van that had circled the block 3 times in the past hour. She ran the plates and they came back stolen. She called for backup immediately, and when officers approached the van, Dylan was inside with enough explosives to destroy the entire block. He'd been watching the safe house, waiting for the right moment to strike. If Officer Grant hadn't noticed that van, if she hadn't trusted her instincts that something was off, you'd both be dead right now. I couldn't breathe. We'd been so close to dying again, and we hadn't even known we were in danger. Officer Grant had saved our lives twice now. First by being there when Daniel needed someone to contact me, making sure I knew he was safe, and now by catching Dylan before he could finish what his brother started. Detective Park's voice softened slightly. Both brothers are in custody now. Dylan is being charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, possession of explosives, and a long list of other felonies. Combined with the evidence against Victor, neither of them is ever getting out of prison. You're safe. It's really over this time. Later that afternoon, I asked if I could meet Officer Grant in person to thank her. Detective Park arranged it, and she arrived at the safe house around 3 o'clock. Up close, she was even more impressive than I'd imagined. Tall, confident, with kind eyes that seemed to notice everything. When I tried to thank her, tried to put into words what she'd done for us, she held up her hand. "You don't need to thank me. This is what I signed up for. This is why I became a cop." But I shook my head. "You went beyond what anyone would expect. You paid attention when it mattered. You didn't dismiss anything as unimportant. Because of you, Daniel and I are both alive." Officer Grant's eyes got watery, and she looked away for a moment before speaking. 10 years ago, I lost my sister to domestic violence. Her boyfriend had been escalating for months, making threats, showing up at her work, classic stalking behavior. She reported it multiple times, but the officers who took her statements didn't take it seriously enough. They told her to call if he actually did something, as if threats weren't already something. 3 weeks later, he killed her. Her voice cracked slightly. Since that day, I made myself a promise. I would never let someone slip through the cracks. I would never dismiss a concern as unimportant. I would pay attention to every detail, every instinct, every warning sign, because if just one officer had done that for my sister, she'd still be alive. I pulled Officer Grant into a hug, and she hugged me back. We stood there for a moment, two women who'd both been touched by violence, both saved by vigilance and quick thinking. When we pulled apart, she smiled. "I'm glad I could help. And I'm glad your husband trusted his training enough to get out of that house when he did. He saved both your lives with that decision." She was right. Daniel's training, his attention to detail, his refusal to ignore something that seemed off, that's what had started the chain of events that kept us alive. The investigation moved quickly after that. Both Brennan brothers were offered plea deals to avoid lengthy trials that would have dragged on for years. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Security camera footage from multiple locations showing Dylan watching our house and following our routines. Receipts for materials used in the bomb. Text messages between the brothers planning the attack in detail. Forensic evidence linking them to the explosive device. Daniel's testimony about Victor's threats. The confession Victor had given when he thought he'd succeeded. Their public defenders looked at the mountain of evidence and advised them both to plead guilty in exchange for reduced sentences. Victor Brennan stood in court 3 months later and pleaded guilty to attempted murder, arson, possession of explosives, and manufacturing illegal fireworks. The judge sentenced him to 40 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Dylan Brennan pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and possession of explosives. He got 25 years. The judge made it clear that both men would spend the rest of their productive lives behind bars, and when they were released, if they lived that long, they'd be old men with nothing left. I attended both sentencing hearings, sitting in the gallery with Daniel on one side and Beth on the other. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood up. "You destroyed our home, but you didn't destroy us. You tried to kill us out of revenge for my husband doing his job, for protecting public safety, for following the law. You felt entitled to take our lives because you were angry about facing consequences for your own illegal actions. But you failed. We're still here. We're still together. And every day we wake up alive is a reminder that good people who pay attention, who trust their training, who refuse to look the other way, those people are stronger than your hate." Officer Grant saw a van circling our safe house and didn't dismiss it. Daniel saw wires that didn't belong and didn't ignore them. Those small moments of awareness saved us. You wanted us to die in fear, but instead we're living in gratitude. Victor stared at me through the whole statement with empty eyes, showing no remorse whatsoever. Dylan at least had the decency to look down at his hands. When I finished, the judge thanked me and dismissed the court. As they led the Brennan brothers away in handcuffs, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was really over. They'd never be able to hurt us or anyone else again. Our house was a total loss. The insurance company confirmed what we already knew. Between the explosion, the fire, and the water damage from the fire hoses, there was nothing salvageable. Everything we owned was gone, but the insurance payout was enough to rebuild. We met with architects and contractors, designing a new house on the same lot. Daniel insisted on being involved in every detail of the safety features: reinforced doors, a state-of-the-art security system, fire suppression throughout, multiple exits from every room. Some people said we were being paranoid, but after what we'd been through, we didn't care. We needed to feel safe in our own home. During the months of construction, we lived in a small apartment downtown. It was strange being surrounded by temporary furniture and borrowed belongings, but it was also oddly freeing. We weren't tied to possessions anymore. We'd learned the hard way that things could be replaced, but people couldn't. We spent our evenings talking about what really mattered, making plans for our future, dreaming about the life we'd build in our new house. Daniel started going to therapy to process the trauma of finding that bomb and nearly dying in the explosion. I joined him after a few weeks, realizing I needed help dealing with my own fear and anxiety. One evening, about 6 months after the explosion, Daniel and I were having dinner at a small restaurant near our apartment when he reached across the table and took my hand. "I've been thinking about something. When that bomb went off, when I thought I might not make it, the only thing I could think about was you, about all the things we hadn't done yet, all the dreams we'd put off for someday. I don't want to wait for someday anymore." I squeezed his hand, knowing exactly what he meant. Neither do I. That night, we decided to stop putting off starting a family. Life was too short and too unpredictable to wait for the perfect moment. A year after the explosion, we moved into our rebuilt home. It looked similar to our old house from the outside, but inside it was completely different. New layout, new everything, new memories waiting to be made. And I was 4 months pregnant with our daughter. The first few months after everything happened were harder than I expected. I thought once the Brennan brothers were in prison, once we were safe, everything would go back to normal. But trauma doesn't work that way. I couldn't sleep without nightmares. Every unexpected sound made me jump. Every time Daniel was late coming home from work, my mind immediately went to the worst possible scenario. I'd check the locks on our apartment door multiple times before bed, and even then I'd wake up at 3 in the morning convinced I'd forgotten one. Daniel was struggling too. He'd wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, reliving the moment he opened that electrical panel and saw the bomb counting down. We both started seeing a therapist who specialized in PTSD and trauma recovery. It was slow work, but gradually the nightmares became less frequent. We learned coping strategies for the anxiety, techniques for grounding ourselves when panic set in, and ways to support each other through the healing process. Beth had been affected by everything too. She'd been with me that night, had seen me fall apart, had driven me to the hospital not knowing if Daniel was alive or dead. As an ER nurse, she was used to dealing with emergencies, but when it was her own family in danger, all her professional training had gone out the window. She started working with the hospital's crisis intervention team, using what she'd learned from our experience to help other families navigate traumatic situations. She told me that being able to turn her fear into something productive, something that helped others, made the whole experience feel less meaningless. Our elderly neighbor, Frank Morrison, became one of our closest friends after everything that happened. He'd been evacuated from his home the night of the explosion, had watched our house burn from behind the police barricade, and had called us every single day while we were in the safe house to check on us. When we moved back into our rebuilt home, Frank was the first person we invited over. He brought a housewarming gift, a new doormat that said, "Home Sweet Home," and we all cried a little. He told us that in all his years in the military and all his years as a civilian, he'd never seen two people handle a crisis with as much grace and trust as Daniel and I had shown. "You trusted each other when it mattered most," he said. "That's what got you through this." Daniel's work partner, Andre, had taken what happened extremely personally. He blamed himself for not recognizing how dangerous Victor Brennan's threats had been, for not pushing harder to have protection assigned to Daniel. No matter how many times Daniel told him it wasn't his fault, that no one could have predicted Brennan would actually build a bomb, Andre carried the guilt, but he channeled it into action. He started advocating for better protection protocols for city inspectors who dealt with hostile property owners. He pushed for training on recognizing escalating threats, and for a system to track individuals who made threats against city employees. Within a year, the city implemented new safety measures that protected inspectors across all departments. Something good came from something terrible. Officer Melissa Grant and I stayed in touch, meeting for coffee every couple of months. She became more than just the officer who saved our lives. She became a friend, someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and rebuild from nothing. She'd lost her sister and turned that grief into a mission to protect others. I'd nearly lost my life and was trying to figure out what to do with the second chance I'd been given. We'd talk about trauma and healing, about finding meaning in chaos, about the randomness of violence and the intentionality of kindness. She was there when I found out I was pregnant, and she cried happy tears right along with me. The media attention around our story was intense for a while. Local teacher and fire inspector survived bomb attack, ran in newspapers across the state. We did one interview with a local news station because we wanted to publicly thank Officer Grant, the bomb squad technicians who'd risked their lives trying to disarm the device, and Frank Morrison for being such a caring neighbor. We wanted people to know that we'd survived because multiple people had made the choice to help, to pay attention, to act when it mattered. After that one interview, we declined all other media requests. We didn't want to be defined by the worst thing that had ever happened to us. We wanted to move forward with our lives. Daniel started speaking at fire safety conferences across the region. He'd tell the story of finding the bomb, of trusting his training, of making the split-second decision to evacuate rather than try to be a hero. That electrical panel being slightly open saved my life, he'd tell audiences of fellow inspectors and safety professionals. If I'd ignored it, told myself I'd check it later or dismissed it as nothing, I wouldn't be standing here. Pay attention to the details. Trust your training. Don't ignore warning signs, no matter how small they seem. His presentations were always packed, and other inspectors would come up afterward to thank him for sharing his story and to tell him it had made them more vigilant in their own work. I incorporated lessons from our experience into my art classes in ways I never expected. I'd talk to my students about trust, about how Daniel had asked me to trust him without explanation, and how that trust had saved my life. Trust isn't about understanding everything, I'd tell them. It's about believing that someone has your best interests at heart, even when you can't see the whole picture. My students responded in surprising ways. They started sharing their own stories about times when trusting someone had made a difference, or times when they wished they'd trusted their own instincts. My classroom became a space where we talked about more than just art. We talked about life, relationships, intuition, and the importance of listening to that inner voice that tells you when something's wrong. 2 years after the explosion, Daniel and I were sitting on the porch of our rebuilt home, watching our 6-month-old daughter play on a blanket in the grass. We'd named her Hope because that's what she represented. Hope for the future. Hope that good things could come after terrible things. Hope that we could build a beautiful life even after everything had been destroyed. Daniel reached over and took my hand. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't trusted that text message? If you'd come home anyway? I nodded. I thought about it more often than I wanted to admit. We got incredibly lucky. Lucky that you found the bomb in time. Lucky that I listened to you. Lucky that Officer Grant was paying attention. Lucky in so many ways. Daniel squeezed my hand. I don't think it was just luck. I think it was training, intuition, trust, and people choosing to care. That's what saved us. He was right. Every person in our story had made a choice. Daniel chose to investigate that slightly open electrical panel instead of ignoring it. He chose to evacuate immediately instead of trying to disarm the bomb himself. He chose to text me a simple message that wouldn't cause panic, but would keep me away. I chose to trust that message even though I didn't understand it. Officer Grant chose to answer Daniel's phone when I called, chose to track down that suspicious van, chose to act on her instincts. Frank Morrison chose to pay attention to his neighborhood. Andre chose to push for better safety protocols. Beth chose to support me through the worst night of my life. Every single one of those choices mattered. If you've stuck with me through this entire story, I want to ask you something. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. But more importantly, think about the people in your life who've earned your trust. Thank them. Tell them what they mean to you, because you never know when that trust might be the thing that saves your life. The lesson I learned from all of this isn't complicated, but it's powerful. Trust the people who've proven themselves trustworthy. When Daniel told me not to come home and to trust him, he wasn't asking me to blindly follow orders. He was drawing on 6 years of marriage, where he'd never given me a reason not to trust him. He'd earned that trust through consistency, honesty, and always having my best interests at heart. That's why when he sent that cryptic message, I listened. If someone in your life who's earned your trust tells you something that doesn't make sense in the moment, listen to them. They might see danger you can't see. They might know something they can't explain right then. Trust isn't about control. It's about believing someone cares enough about you to protect you, even in ways you don't understand yet. I also learned that heroes don't always look the way we expect them to. They're not always dramatic or obvious. Sometimes a hero is a fire inspector who notices a slightly open electrical panel. Sometimes a hero is a police officer who notices a van circling a block. Sometimes a hero is a neighbor who pays attention to strange cars in driveways. Sometimes a hero is a sister who makes you tea and sits with you through the longest night of your life. Heroism is often quiet, observant, and rooted in the choice to care about other people's safety and well-being. Looking back now, 3 years after that Thursday night when my world nearly ended, I can see how much we've grown. Daniel and I are stronger as a couple because we've been through the worst and come out the other side together. We have a beautiful daughter who will grow up knowing that her parents survived something terrible and chose to build something beautiful from the ashes. We have friendships forged in crisis that will last a lifetime. We have a deep appreciation for every ordinary day, every quiet evening, every moment of peace. Our house is full of life now. Hope's toys scattered across the living room floor, Daniel's tomato plants thriving in the backyard garden, my art studio in the spare room where I paint between teaching and parenting, the kitchen where we cook Sunday dinners and make memories. It's not the same house we lost, but it's a good home, maybe even a better one, because we know how precious it is, how easily it could all be taken away, and how lucky we are to have it. I keep that original text message saved in my phone. Don't come home tonight. Stay at Beth's. Trust me. Those 11 words saved my life. I look at them sometimes when I'm having a hard day or feeling overwhelmed by the trauma we survived. They remind me that Daniel's love for me is so strong he'd do anything to keep me safe. They remind me that trust is a powerful force. They remind me that we survived, and survival is worth celebrating. I'm Lauren Hayes, and my husband saved my life with 3 words. Trust me. We lost our house, our possessions, our sense of security, but we kept our lives. We kept each other. We kept our future. And we learned that trust, intuition, and paying attention to details aren't just good qualities. They're survival skills. When someone who loves you asks you to trust them, honor that request. When your instincts tell you something's wrong, investigate. When you see something that doesn't belong, don't ignore it. These small moments of awareness can be the difference between tragedy and survival. Trust saved my life. Let it save yours too.